Welcome back to the Seek a Strength Ministry for scientific research and all things performance enhancing drugs. Today we're back with a paper review, and we are back with a quite interesting topic and something that crops up a lot. Asymmetries across limbs in individuals is something that's quite interesting. It's something that for some people it bothers them a huge amount, may or may not contribute to injury, and for other people then is something they don't think is particularly important. Some people kind of fall in the middle, they're like, probably address it, but don't go overboard with it. There is mounting research in relation to the asymmetries in limbs and individuals as predictors of performance or poor performance and potential predictors of injury. Now, these are the two main camps people will look at when looking at asymmetries and their effect. Most people are concerned in relation to injury susceptibility if you have asymmetries. For example, when they're squatting, they'll look at their legs, they'll see one side is squatting maybe slightly higher than the other, or one leg is weaker on split squats than the other, or one leg is larger than the other, and they will be concerned. Now, differences across limbs likely will never be exactly 0%. It's likely the ratio will never be 1-to-1, where we'll have the exact same size, familiarity, mind-muscle connection, and power production, strength, force production, flexibility from side to side. But the emerging evidence seems to suggest that there is a percentage difference once we get beyond this kind of range or this obstacle or this barrier, that we begin to see these prospects for potential injury. Now, in future, we will look at other papers for injury susceptibility, but for today we are looking at probably a very important one, and inter-limb differences on performance. So today's paper is titled "Vertical and Horizontal Asymmetries are Related to Slower Sprinting Time and Jump Performance in Elite Youth Female Soccer Players." This is coming at us from the London Sport Institute. It is coming from the Athlete Health and Performance Research Centre in Doha and Arsenal Football Club training ground. So what we had 19 elite youth soccer players. So soccer, of course, being football for any European people watching, and I know European people don't like when you say soccer is football, but in Ireland we also say soccer because we have Gaelic football here, and when you say football, people think you mean Gaelic football. So what we had was 2 testing days separated by 72 hours. The individuals were also given a separate familiarity session where they were giving as many attempts at the testing movements that they were doing until they were familiar with these, which is quite a useful thing to do. And then they came in for their testing. So we had 19 youth players, all under the age of 18. They had familiarity with strength conditioning, as they'd been in an academy scenario, and had been doing 20-minute strength conditioning sessions twice a week, where they were gaining familiarity with the basic compound movements and technical proficiency, as they stated in this study. So we had 5 different things that were tested for these youth athletes. We had single leg counter movement jump, we had single leg hop for distance, we had single leg triple hop for distance, crossover hop for distance, and then we had 5, 10 and 20 meter sprints measured by time gates. So the individuals were tested for these twice over 2 different days, and then they were put through these tests until they got some data from that, and then that data was analysed, which data we'll go over now.
On to the results section next. So the first thing they looked at in results was which of the kind of jump tests would be most applicable for testing imbalances. So single leg counter movement jump showed greater side to side differences compared to all other jumps. So it's a great one if you're a coach or an athlete looking to find out if you have an imbalance in you or in your athletes. Then single leg counter movement jump looks to be the test you'd want to do. The big advantage of a single leg counter movement jump is it's pretty easy to test and it's pretty low skill. Then probably the biggest piece of insight, or the biggest result we get from the entire paper, is up next. Larger vertical asymmetries were associated with slower sprint times. So they basically found that in the vertical jumping tests, if you had a large asymmetry from side to side, we'll talk about the magnitude of that asymmetry in a sec. If you had a large asymmetry from side to side, you are going to have a slower sprint time. So the example they give would be is somebody who has a 10% or above asymmetry from side to sideness in a single leg counter movement jump would be significantly more likely to have a slower sprint time. Next, they found that asymmetries during the triple hop test were associated strongly with a lower vertical jump. So it's not necessarily just the sprint that's being affected by this asymmetry from side to side, but also when you look at certain jump tests, you see vertical jump being affected also. And obviously that makes sense. If you have a big difference from side to side in a vertical jump test, you're probably going to have a slightly lower vertical jump than someone who wouldn't. Finally, it's noted that differences or asymmetries above 10% in athletes should be looked into further. So asymmetry of less than 10% from side to side probably isn't that big a deal. Anything greater than 10% should probably be looked into as a direct influencer of performance outcomes.
So first of all, as we like to always talk about when we're getting to results, was this a good quote-unquote study? And in our opinion, when we look at through the study, there isn't really any major holes in the study. There isn't any major issues. It's an observational study with some testing. You know, there's kind of two styles of study we usually see in S&C. There's kind of the interventional study, which can have its problems of its own, or then we can have this observational testing style study, which again can also have problems. And there isn't any major issues in this particular one. So the first thing you might think of when you look at this study, you might say, okay, look, soccer players predominantly kick with one leg and very rarely do any other kicking with their offside leg or their weaker leg, as it were. That doesn't really make a difference for this study. As we know, asymmetries exist in all sports across all individuals. We know, for example, runners might have a greater stride on one side, so they might reach out a little bit further with their dominant leg compared to the opposite leg. And sometimes even in, European and world champions, we'll see that these differences can be quite high, in the realms of like 5 and 10 centimeters greater on one side at certain points. Now, the interesting thing about that is when we often look at elite athletes, we just want to be sure, are we seeing something that is success in spite of or success because of, or is it important to it, or is it completely irrelevant? And this is what these kind of studies are looking to investigate. I think it's very interesting. The looking into asymmetries is something that happens a lot in the strength and conditioning world, and it's something that's been around for a long time, and people do take very hard stances across the board. So the more of these studies done, I think, are definitely more valuable. More studies, more value. More value, more study.
More better is good.
More science, more better.
Yeah, I think the other good thing about this study is it's a very low barrier for entry here, The idea of testing someone's single leg counter movement jump is quite easy. Even in the most basic terms, videoing someone from a side-on angle, getting them to do a single leg box jump to a quite low box where they're landing as high as they can, and then checking the kind of center of mass or the relative height of the center of mass from one side to the other. It's a very easy test to do, particularly if you have a group of athletes where you're constantly coaching them and constantly training them. You could bring them in at the start of a 3-month block, check if they have these asymmetries, then test them again at the end of the 3-month block and see if these asymmetries have dwindled in any way. So I think that's a major positive of this study. If you're a coach, if you're an athlete, this is something that you can directly take into your kind of philosophy of coaching, and you can implement it without the need of a force plate or any of the other studies where we might talk about cooling interventions or something. This is a nice, approachable way to think about sports science. The next thing then is just a small piece on kind of motor cognition or motor learning. So obviously sprinting is very much a skill, as with vertical jump and as with strength training in general is. But what you have to think about here is just the group of athletes themselves. So this is a group of 18-year-old and under female soccer players. It's very likely they're still developing that speed or that skill of being fast. And then when you look at their outcomes, are the people who have lower sprint times, are they just slightly further back on that learning curve? Have they not quite developed that kind of utmost of their sprinting potential, and they have some asymmetries because of that? And then do we have those slightly more skilled movers who've weeded out some of those asymmetries? They might have been sprinting for a couple of years longer and they've learned to work around those asymmetries and cancel them out. It's all part of that kind of motor skill learning. So in the same way where we get to recruit muscle fibers faster, we get to recruit larger muscle fibers faster, we also get to have improved coordination, improved balance, all of these things that come along with learning how to sprint better, learning how to be stronger. Is that what we're seeing here? There's no real way of knowing because we don't have the relative experience data on this group, but it's definitely something to keep in mind, is that sprinting, as with strength, as with flexibility, is very much a skill-based thing. And if they are just slightly further down the road with that skill acquisition, could be a thing that everybody has these slight imbalances at the start, then people work on them, the imbalance dwindles and then their sprint times increase. We don't know, but it is something interesting to speculate on.
So a lot of times people will ask us, they're like, what have you changed your opinion with over the years, or where do you kind of get your information from and when you're deciding on things? And there's 3 different areas. There's kind of experience, so personal training, thought processes. There's talking to other very knowledgeable people, so other coaches, other elite athletes, to elite athletes. And then there is research and information like this. So we would always, if have done any of your programs or got any coaching from us or seen our own training, we both give and do single leg and unilateral training for the upper and lower body. Now this is with the kind of thought process that logically you would think, okay, we don't really want any imbalances. It's known for a very long time that elite athletes and amateur athletes and all athletes have asymmetries across their limbs from side to side. There's phenomenons like the contralateral effect, where if you break your right arm and you keep training your left arm, you'll maintain more muscle mass in your right arm than if you've done no training for your upper body. There's things like this where you're like, okay, is it a really important factor to do a lot of unilateral training and make sure we actually balance out these things? Or is it enough just to do that unilateral training and then not really worry about the actual difference from side to side? But there does seem to be a growing body of evidence, and it's certainly impacting our thought process around that unilateral training, is it does seem to be productive to try, not absolutely murder yourself, because we see that it gets beyond 10% difference when we see a major effect, but get them as close as possible while still doing other meaningful training. So we're not going to stop everything, go back to basics and try and fix everything as much as possible, but it certainly is something to think about in relation to potential for injury, coming back from injury, and also just as important for actually achieving peak performance and higher levels of performance is evening out those imbalances to a certain extent, bringing them within this kind of acceptable range. Now you, as an athlete, oftentimes will have asymmetries, and you'll look at things and they may not always be power asymmetries. They could be mobility asymmetries or flexibility, be a whole host of different things from side to side. And we often get these questions and people saying, are you concerned about it? Should it be something I should focus on? I've been training for 10 years and I haven't had a problem yet. From the point of view now, from kind of growing evidence, I think, is you should pursue them, but in a very tame manner. You don't have to kill yourself. You don't have to stop back squatting. You don't have to stop doing your sport. If there's no problem now, if you don't have any injury, then I would definitely be eyeing it up, having it part of your training process, have it part of your goal. If for example, someone recently asked in their Facebook live stream, they said that their right leg was 4 centimeters smaller than their left leg, and is that something they should worry about? This person was a weightlifter, and we know weightlifters from a European Weightlifting Federation study have a larger leg on the one they split jerk onto. So the front foot that goes forward in split jerk generally seems to have more muscle thickness. And we see injuries in weightlifters, but is there really a bigger difference for those weightlifters? Is something we didn't know at the time. Would those lifters with those larger differences have an issue? So it seems now that it might be prudent just to make sure that those differences, and it kind of backs up the logic that, okay, in retrospect, when we have these kind of studies, we can say a little bit more confidently that, yeah, of course, one leg stronger than the other is probably going to take more load, or the offside leg isn't going to be able to take as much load or as much training as frequently and may be more susceptible. Or does the more dominant leg, does that take more training more frequently and then thus has too much overload in it? Eventually the tissues give up and give some kind of grief to you or let you know. So I think it is definitely worth, if you have these kind of asymmetries from side to side, pursuing, but in a rational manner. Rational.
Thanks very much for watching yet another paper review. If there's a topic that's really perplexing you, or a topic where you see people constantly quoting these different studies, this happened with us with ice baths and sauna kind of studies, comment down below, make us aware of that topic, and we'll try and follow up with a paper review in the next few weeks.
Don't ask about weed, because we've done like 3 weed paper reviews if you go back and look for them. And
people always get so mad.
No, they don't. No, they get mad at you for hating stoners. People don't get mad when we say weed is bad and they look at the science, they're like, oh, that's not great. So we have done a lot of weed papers, so please don't ask about weed, because we've done it definitely like 3 times. We've done like meta-analysis and stuff, and they're like, it's not great for training.